All right. Thank you, Simeon, for that very lovely introduction. So my name is Musoke Andrew, and I am a research associate at Cylab Africa. This is a research lab based on Carnegie Mellon University right here in Kigali. Cylab itself is it's a technology lab that is focusing on cybersecurity and privacy issues in different projects or programs. So under the Cylab Africa initiative, we have started the Upanzi Digital Public Goods Network. And just to give you a brief about this, it is what we aim to do here is we work with a couple of institutions, different institutions, both in research, government, and technology, to create a body of knowledge around different digital public goods. And from that, we're also interested in doing capacity building, just like Mojaloop is doing right here. And the idea is we have this hub and spoke model where we're starting right here in Kigali and working with the different academic institutions across the continent, and eventually expand to the globe and replicate the work that we're doing with capacity building and solution creation in the different institutes. So initially, we started with an interest in the areas of digital identity and digital payments, capacity building, and human-computer interaction. And since then, we've expanded into the different verticals of agriculture, digital wealth, education, health, still payments, and also still digital ID. So going back to why we decided to perform the evaluation. So I think I don't need to explain too much to this crowd the importance of financial inclusion in a developing country, and also I don't need to give the benefits of Mojaloop as an open source project. But we did pick, we were interested in financial inclusion, and we did pick Mojaloop as a great candidate for evaluating. And the question that we're trying to answer here is, okay, great, so we have this amazing project, but the people who are going to be deploying it or using it do not have, may not have a clue about, or it may be their first time to hear about Mojaloop, right? So we wanted to take that perspective of a zero-knowledge adopter and just use what is publicly available, meaning the documentation and the long-to-hour videos, and find out how easy is it to deploy Mojaloop, and also what kind of security by default is provided by Mojaloop. So with how we approached the deployability and security aspect of this, we ran an installation. By then it was version 13. This was last year. So we ran a deployment of version 13 in the cloud, AWS, and we documented our experiences. And actually, right now we just have, from the last session, we deployed an on-premise version of Mojaloop as well. And these experiences and recommendations are documented, and the reports can be made available. Then once we're done with the deployment, then we have a dedicated vulnerability assessment and penetration testing team that played around with Mojaloop as well. And the last thing that we do is to try and understand the utility of the digital public good. We develop use cases on top of it. This is currently a work in progress. So one of the, when I'm talking about security, one of the things that came about is, okay, so we have a dedicated vulnerability and penetration testing team in the lab, but this is not always going to be the case. So how does maybe a fintech or just someone who wants to play around with it, or someone who's trying to audit the DPG, how do, in this case Modular Loop, how would they understand, at least get a baseline security posture of what kind of risk they're exposing themselves to, or how they're expanding their attack surface area. So out of that, we developed a security toolkit. Essentially, it's a fancy way of saying we bunched up a couple of different already developed open source tools. The popular ones, you have Nmap, OWASP, because popularly Modular Loop is running on Kubernetes. You have the infrastructure tools as well. And this is something that can be expanded. So the key thing here is that it's modularized, and it is also, we try to make it portable and lightweight so that to cater for anyone, I mean the different kind of environments. So if something like OpenVAS is really heavy, so it's not part of the toolkit, but rather you have instructions to deploy OpenVAS, and then you can connect to the toolkit and install it, and it will run and output some beautiful humanly readable reports. And at least you'll be able to say, look, this is the baseline. This is the baseline security risk that I'm exposing myself to. All right, so on to at least some of the highlights of the experiences that we had with the deployment of Modular Loop. So like I said, this was version 13. A lot of work has been done by the foundation and the community. So just keep that in mind. Some of these things have been fixed. So the first thing is all the components of Modular Loop are open source and open standard. This seems obvious, but just want to stress the importance of this is that you could have an open source project, but if the standards that are being used are not are proprietary as well, then it kind of defeats the entire purpose, right? So you're being vendor locked in without knowing that you're being vendor locked in, right? And Modular Loop does a great job of using different popular open standards, making interoperability even much easier. Then on the team had difficulties with API documentation. It is non-centralized in the sense that for some of the evaluations, you have to go from the website documentation into the specific repository to dig out maybe the Swagger files. So that was a challenge. Then we've seen the simulator being shown. I think it was demonstrated earlier on by CEO of Wiredin. And this was also hugely invaluable for just doing sanity checks. We have the deployment done. So how do we tell if if everything is working as expected, meaning the components and all? And also, you could read about how Modular Loop does in so many words, or you could actually see how the payment is flowing back and forth using the simulator. Then at that point, we were using the Helm deployment. I think this was pre-mini loop. And the deployment itself required a lot of manual intervention to make sure that the components themselves are working. And particularly on this was the networking aspect. The Helm charts use Ingress as networking, and because we were deploying on AWS, we were using the EKS infrastructure tool, which came with its own Ingress format. So the next recommendation, I think, is related to that, is to separate the networking from the Helm chart, because as we know, this would allow flexibility in different Ingress types. So one could use Nginx, another one could use some other proprietary tool, or Istio, and so on and so forth. Then with the infrastructure, the team needed to first understand what Kubernetes is. before moving on to do the deployment of Mojo Loop. I think there's some room there for, which has already been talked about, infrastructure as code. So involving, rather including automation scripts would go a long way in increasing the bootstrapping for Mojo Loop deployment. Then Mojo Loop also comes with a lot of logging and monitoring tools that are configured to work with the Mojo Loop deployment, and also that is a very big help in understanding what exactly is going on or debugging if there's any issue with Mojo Loop. Then we noticed that everyone has their own deployment environment, and it's always going to have its unique nuances. So this is just a recommendation to the community, is to encourage sharing of those experiences. So Simeon demonstrated the Mojo Loop Central, so I think that's a very nice tool. So if the community could keep sharing these kinds of experiences from the different types of environments, that would be good. Then there was also, I think, a need for security recommendations for security best practices, both on the Mojo Loop deployment itself, but then also how to best, or rather recommendations for securing the base infrastructure as well. So then the last, I think the new thing here is we spent about 1 week with Helm charts deploying version 13, then coming to learn about Miniloop. That took down a week's work into just a few minutes, and yeah, almost put me out of a job. All right, so those were the experiences. Then some of the work that we've started with Mojo Loop at the lab. The best way to understand what is going on. So prior we were doing the deployability and security, but now we want to understand more about Mojo Loop itself. And the best way to learn is by actually doing. So this is a project that we've started at the lab, and Mojo Shop. It's going to be an application that is a merchant application, right? So we're going to have both the merchant side and the user side. And the idea is we have a deployment of Mojo Loop at the lab, and we want to explore with this use case how more and become Mojo fluent, right? So the mobile app is the reason to do, so we'll just use mock DFSPs to simulate during the development, and eventually, hopefully, we'll be able to work with maybe aggregators or some actual DFSPs. And if anyone visits the campus, the CMU campus, in maybe a month or two, you'll be able to buy yourself a coffee with this, hopefully, right? Right. So this is just, it's a bit blurry, but this is what the mock-up looks like. This is already developed, so now we are moving on to the integration with the Mojo Loop instance. It's going to be QR code based, and also using a merchant ID from the merchant payments. And right under there in the login space, one other pet project that we have is creating interoperability between digital ID and digital payments. So with this application, we aim to, you'll be able to log in with MOSIP and perform your payments and authenticate with your digital ID that you would have created on campus. So definitely visit. All right, so lastly, I would like to introduce to you the Cylab Digital Experience Center. This was actually launched yesterday at the lab as well. So the best way to explain why we have a digital experience center at the lab, we all know the benefits of having digital public goods, but I mean for a country, a national, at the national level. But the question now becomes, how do you know which DPG is good for you, and in what instances, or how to use it, etc. Right? And again, best way of understanding something is by doing. So with the Digital Experience Center, the idea is to put together all the digital public goods that we that we evaluate at the lab, and visitors will be able to have a hands-on experience of a hands-on experience with the digital public goods. We aim to create different sandbox environments. So for digital ID, we have a sandbox environment for MOSIP. And then DHIS2 as well. So anyone, any manner of stakeholder, whether regulator or a private company or startup that wants to play around with these DPGs, you will have a safe environment to do that. And then finally, we do all the evaluations that we do and different feedback that we get from people using these sandbox environments. We'll be able to make those evaluations impartial evaluations public. And of course, this is an invitation for, you're wondering where it was, yeah. It's an invitation for Moduloop to join the Digital Experience Center. So yes, there is a sandbox that was presented, but at the same time, why not have something right here in Kigali? And connected to the entire ecosystem. Could have digital financial service providers connected to the deployment that we have here. So, and in terms of capacity building, if someone wants to learn or utilize Moduloop, they can come over. Right? So, yeah, finally, the Digital Experience Center is just is to be a place for people to come and learn, innovate, and then eventually contribute back to the DPG space, in this case, Modulo. Right, yeah. That's it from me. Thank you.
We'll take one or two questions, if there's any. All right, thank you so much. Round of applause for Andrew. All right, so we have come to the end of our day, but just want to keep you here for just another 3 or so minutes. Could we have all the participants on Zoom up on the screen? And then the folks on Zoom, would you please come on camera so that we can see who's there? There's about 36 of you up there. Can we get the Zoom participants on the screen? And then those of you who are on Zoom, if you do not mind and if you're able to, please come on camera. We'd like to see you and appreciate you for joining us. Excellent. I see Michael. I see Tsili. Winley Ong is there. Oh, this is so great. Hey, David Fry. Hey, Jason. There's Miguel. Still waiting for a few more people, whoever's online. If you could just come off on camera, sorry. These are all the amazing people who have spent time with us, so please acknowledge them with a quick round of applause. And if you're on Zoom, you can wave back and clap or something. Awesome, it's so great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's important that we always remember there's all these people who are listening in, actively participating. I can see your comments, and I hope your questions are being answered. We can see a lot of chatter and a lot of comments in the chat box. That's great. Thank you so much for being here. To the rest of the room, we'll play a little game of Simeon Says. So if you can close your laptops first, and then just stand up. Where's Megan? Is Megan in the room? Oh, okay. Could you ask her to come in, please?